If you've been watching any gaming news sites, you've probably seen that Microsoft has increased the price of Xbox Live Gold to approximately double its original price, from $59.99 US for 1 year to instead only 6 months. After a public outcry, they did in fact reverse this decision, and ensured that any game with a free online component like Fortnite or the upcoming Halo Infinite multiplayer will not require a gold subscription. Besides the fact that the new Xbox costs a lot of money, it doesn't even have very many interesting online multiplayer games at the moment, and shelling out another $120 a year on top of that is just not jiving with gamers at the moment. In fact, this mostly seems like a ploy to get people into buying Games Pass and selling the value of the quote-unquote free games accessible through the service at that slight premium over that of the cost of gold itself. I, myself, attempted to purchase a year of gold off their website last year and found that it instead converted my $60 Canadian 1-year pass into 4 months of Games Pass Ultimate, automatically without my knowledge or consent. Now, they don't even offer the 1-year option on their website anymore, and you'd have to purchase that in the form of those subscription cards from retailers like GameStop during a global pandemic, where businesses like GameStop shouldn't be open anyway because video games aren't exactly an essential business service. But I digress. Microsoft's original reasoning was that, and I quote, "In many markets, the price of the Xbox Live Gold has not changed for years, and in some markets, it hasn't changed for over 10 years. Microsoft had planned to hike the fees to $10.99 for 1 month, $29.99 for 3 months, and $59.99 for 6 months, respectively. This would have doubled the price of an annual membership to just under $120, as I had mentioned, which is now twice the cost of PlayStation Plus and 6 times the cost of Nintendo Switch Online. The idea that video games are an ever-increasingly expensive business venture is, as we have seen time and time again now, absolutely horse hockey. Publishers such as Electronic Arts have been as money-hungry as possible since their insidious insertion of microtransactions in both their major series and smaller titles, and thus have destroyed beloved franchises in the process in pursuit of just a little bit more. No, I will not forgive them for what happened to Dead Space. They deserve so much better than 5 million copies to continue the franchise? That's absolute bullshit! I recently heard on the Insert Credit podcast that Nintendo can apparently stand to be at a loss for something like 40 straight years before they even have to worry about going bankrupt, and that doesn't surprise me in the least. Companies have a lot of money, a lot of capital, so I wouldn't doubt if it was much more than Nintendo that had that staying power. Microsoft similarly has their own hardware, software, studios, and dozens of other tech products offered besides video games. So the drive to pull in double the money from their player base every year is nothing but greed. I highly doubt that money is going to server maintenance and the like to improve user experiences. To highlight this point further, let's take a look at a game with no microtransactions and see if the cost of development is outweighed by the relative sales success worldwide. Now, I will be rounding and approximating this information with the cost of US dollars, so the number will be slightly skewed, but bear with me. In The Last of Us 2, a game we have heard so many things about these last few months, that had gone on record as selling 4 million copies worldwide within the game's first 3 days of release. Development time over the past bunch of years leads to a speculative cost of about $100 million US dollars. So taking that 4 million copies that they sold in the first 3 days and multiplying that by the US standard of $60 a copy brings us to about $240 million. The game raked in about 2.4 times its own budget in the first 3 days of its release. That has nothing to do with marketing costs or anything else. I'm not sure if the marketing cost is tied directly to development costs, but either way, 2.5 times almost in the first 3 days. Now, I know that isn't exactly precise, and different countries have different pricing models for their games, i.e. Australia costing a minimum of $120 per game, and taking into account exchange rates and the like, which Australia still translates to about $90 per game. For a single-player experience with no additional ways to wring money out of their consumers, it's impressive, to say the least. The game continues to smash sales records as the year went on, so it made even more money. But what happens when you try to get blood from a stone? Have your consumers pay full price for a game and then continue to nickel and dime them for everything they have, so they can even just continue playing? Take-Two Interactive's NBA 2K20 is infamous for having a terrible pay-to-win scheme tied to its own multiplayer sections, with loot boxes and surprise mechanics designed to keep you spending and spending additional dollars just to keep up with your friends, let alone try to have any successful presence online. We've seen similar hooks come from Clash of Clans and similar mobile games where you're practically forced to pay real-world currency or wait for time to pass. In the latter case, you're usually completely demolished by your opponent. The same rings true here. And despite being about an average virtual basketball experience, it still sells upwards of 14 million units. Base profit, that's $840 million. It doesn't matter what the development cost is at that point, considering Take-Two just kind of slaps a new number on their sports games year after year, but even without counting microtransactions, that number is staggering. Take-Two's press release is gloated at the fact that within 1 year from one game, they had made over $1 billion. It's sickening. It's maddening, it's disgusting, and I won't even get into how other publishers mismanage and destroy their beloved IP's credibility in a similar fashion just for a quick buck. Okay, maybe just one. Remember how in Star Wars Battlefront 2, when you wanted one playable character, it would take you upwards of 40 hours for one character? Just to grind out the in-game currency for it for one character? With, like, people with jobs and lives and could only play for maybe 3 or 4 hours a day? 40 hours for one character? At the time, the cost of 60,000 credits took you 40 hours of gameplay in order to earn the right to unlock one character. That means 40 hours of saving each and every credit. That's no buying any loot crates or loot boxes at all, so you don't even get bonus credits from getting duplicates. And worse, Battlefront 2's microtransaction economy is worse than that found in NBA 2K20's. And at least in Battlefront 2, you're not trying to grind out perfect stats on a 5-star LeBron character or whatever the hell you want to call it, just so you can play the game slightly better than you did 5 minutes ago before you had the character in order to keep up with people online. It's ridiculous. But on the flip side, Genshin Impact, a free-to-play Breath of the Wild clone by Chinese developer MiHoYo, costs nothing to start, and yet somehow rakes in almost $6 million every day. There's something to be said about the thirst of anime fans, but this is still an incredible figure. Analysts have speculated that this free-to-play game has raked in about $400 million in its first 2 months alone. And if you haven't heard about Fate Grand Order, a mobile game that was spawned from a terrible light novel where you collect JPEGs of your favorite gender-bent history and mythology characters, has recently made a lifetime $4 billion JPEG dollars last year. At least in Genshin Impact, you can see the model of the character you paid for. These are just cards. And it's making more money than God. And these are free-to-play games. Fortnite Battle Royale has been free-to-play since its inception and dominates the market as well. Rocket League went free-to-play within the last few months, and the player base is still as strong as ever. And even Microsoft is going to dip its toe into offering Halo Infinite's multiplayer portion for free. The risk of trying a free game and spending a few dollars on it is almost zero for a consumer. And that's why these things do gangbusters. It's just slimy and immoral when you also have to see these marketing schemes shoved onto full AAA release titles, just to ensure that they secure your hard-earned dollar before somebody else does. And then the next dollar you earn, and the next dollar you earn, in an endless cycle. With the release of the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, people in the industry have pushed for a price increase of games from the standard $60 to $70. Most people buy digital anyway, so it isn't offsetting costs for physical copies, which aren't even that expensive to press and ship out in the grand scheme of things anyway. The price hike is just another round of corporate greed clutching at your pockets, trying to get a hold of your wallet and hoping you won't notice if $1 or $6 goes missing every time you boot up a video game and see something flashy and cool in the in-game advertisements for in-game cosmetics and the like that they push on their own title screen. Video games have no reason to cost this much. But when a company makes all the money in the world and the investors then say, well, we want a 15% increase next year, they oblige because they want their filthy, greedy little hands on every dime that they can too. The CEOs and higher-ups like Andrew Wilson and Bobby Kotick make millions and millions of dollars in bonuses every year because of increasing sales numbers. And not enough or none of those bonuses are going to the people actually working on those games themselves. And despite the fact that they don't actually do anything for production outside of exist at the top of the company's food chain, they make the most. Even if video games cost half of the price, they would still turn a massive, disgusting profit. No issues, hands down, mostly even without microtransactions. And if games did cost half the price, maybe it would be different spending a few dollars on a new character or a cool skin, because then we as consumers can budget for that. Or even if there was a universal minimum wage so that we could afford to live and spend money on our entertainment as we please, but I don't need Google's help to tell me wages have stagnated for years and we're entering another global recession, meaning the likelihood of that happening just gets slimmer and slimmer every day. An extra $10 on top of what we already pay is just the icebreaker. Because then when we get used to paying just a bit more, that standard has changed. And then they can shovel another $10 on top of that new price tag. This is more than just greed. This is conditioning. When it comes to the cost of buying video games, we've always had the option of voting with our dollar. But within the last 10 years, that prospect has seen a smaller and smaller effect on the industry. So maybe it's finally time to unionize. Companies love to say games aren't political, but that doesn't mean we can't be. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a guillotine to build. See you next week.